for what it's worth, my preference would be to keep it local, but probably to keep it in circuit court, where you could have the same sort of practice that you do now, where you go in and you say the value of the property's been diminished and these are the damages.
Yes, gentlemen, you brought up the education. I believe Scott was talking about that and where the tax base is for it and so forth. And I guess I want to make you aware that in my own particular case, I bought land in '86. The property taxes on that property has went up 350%. And the cap prices, at best, you can say it went up about 25%. We have a situation in the state where we're trying to go to a production-based tax. The thing I'm asking is, can we back that off so it represents our prices that we receive for our livestock more clearly than what we do now? With the land I lease and so forth, I've been accused of being anti-education, and I don't believe that's true. But the point I'm making, with the land I lease, I'm paying about $32,000 in property taxes. You know, I mean, the taxes on that lease land. And I'm not living on that much money. How can we put this more in balance? Because I personally, I'm sending my kids to private school. So I'm paying $32,000, which is about 70% that goes to education, and benefiting none from it. So I just want your opinion.
Well, it's a good question, and you put your finger on one of the weaknesses of the production-based change in the property tax process in South Dakota. I supported it, by the way, and as you know, it was designed to be revenue neutral statewide. There are always going to be winners and losers when you change the formula for assessing property taxes, but by and large, we thought it was fairer to try to use some measure of productivity in terms of property taxes, and I still support that. I think that was the right approach. But I've had a number of folks from the stock growers talk to me about the fact that it doesn't really fit all the situations in production agriculture involving cattle, and so we're going to have to tweak it, and I would support that. I think that answers your question.
Yeah, I will agree that the production method of valuing ag land is better for agriculture. The prior system that used sales of comparable property was failing. I think with good intention, the legislature put in place some legislation in the late 90s to try and help producers that were located next to developing cities, in areas like the Black Hills where people were buying property for very high amounts because of the views. Those kinds of things were taxing producers off the land. And this effort is and it was well-intentioned, but as a consequence, just to give you an example, back in 1997, I think it was, we had over 1,400 sales statewide were utilized to value ag property statewide. By the time we got to just several years ago, the number of sales that were disqualified by these special rules had grown to the extent there were only about 120 sales statewide that could be used. So it really was a lawsuit waiting to happen. And the problem with solving a problem like that through a lawsuit is that the land values would shift very dramatically, very quickly. Under this system, I think it still has some bugs to be worked out, but I think the intent is to allow producers to stay on the land and to recognize the value of the land as agricultural land should be valued based upon the agricultural results. And whether that's prices you get for your livestock or whether it's prices that you pay for the use of the land, hopefully those will be tied together to some degree. And whether you use land rentals or, as you say, livestock prices, they're both intended to somehow tie the value of the land to its productivity for ag uses. So again, I think it's still early in the go, this new system. It will take some tweaking. There are about 60 counties where it's working just fine. There's about 6 counties where it's still working not so well yet. But there is a committee of the legislature that's working on this, trying to tweak it every year, and whether we stick with the system or go to something like you say, I think remains to be seen. But I think the intent is good.
I'm Tom Cavis, running for State Treasurer in Chase. You had me on the air on KBHB a week ago. I appreciate that. And our whole discussion was around transparency and what's going on with Valhalla and specifically game fishing parks. Jerry Apa, who was on the Appropriations Committee for 8 years, chaired it for 6, has said he never heard once of any expenditures on Valhalla whatsoever. As candidates for governor, would you have the state auditor or someone else audit game fishing parks as to what in the heck is going on with their expenditures?
Well, first let me say Valhalla is a historical treasure. It was built by former Senator and Governor Peter Norbeck as his cabin in the hills, and of course it's within the confines of Custer State Park. And when the state reacquired it from private owners, for the last 4 decades, it's been used by governors of both parties in the same way, as a summer retreat for the governor. Now, that being said, I'm wide open to the idea of having more access to it, having it be available for public use, having transparency about who uses it. I don't care if I use it. Governor Rounds allowed me to stay there as his guest. I know Senator Heiderprim